Today, I'll be sharing my experience in an attempt to fully transition from Windows 10 to Linux. So, quite a while ago, I made a video discussing why Windows 10 was an OS I wanted to get away from. It's been quite some time now, so let's discuss my experience, what I ended up with, and what you should know if you're considering switching. First, let's begin and talk about setup. It was easy. I downloaded the latest Manjaro KDE ISO, burned it to a USB, booted it up, installed it alongside Windows 10, and I'm basically done. After customizing everything to feel more familiar, I wanted to tackle gaming. Now, I spent a bunch of time trying to get Steam to work like I was on Windows. Ideally, I'd want to have a secondary drive as a Steam library, and of course the OS drive. The thing with Linux that you have to keep in mind is that if you really want to do some tweaking, it's going to be in the command line. Even when I tried doing everything right, I would usually end up with a bricked install. After a bunch of messing around, I eventually got some games to run, but I had to mount my Steam drive manually, and it really didn't want to work. I did some experimenting by creating an ext4 partition and seeing if Sonic Mania would run with mods with Wine, but in the end, I just gave up on games. I had to recreate my Steam library, but I got over it. I see a lot of videos that go over Linux gaming, but I wish that there was a more in-depth explanation of using secondary drives. I did find out what it was I needed to do, but in the end, it just didn't work out in a practical sense. I'm sure someone with more skill could have made this work better, but this I got over as I don't play a lot of Steam games nowadays. When you get games running though, Linux usually does a great job of doing so, in some cases better than Windows. Not always though, and unfortunately, anti-cheat games won't run at all. Depending on what games you play, Linux could be a viable option, but it also for some just wouldn't work. Now, when it comes to productivity, I feel this was one of the higher points. I went with Manjaro KDE Plasma as customization options are great and it has a lot of stuff baked in that I would have had to manually install on most other distros. The great thing about Linux is the overhead. Unlike Windows 10, which has a multitude of background processes hogging memory, Linux is a clean, bloat-free platform. Windows 10, even on high-end hardware, will still sometimes feel a tad sluggish here and there. Not necessarily slow, but loading up the File Explorer on Windows, for example, versus Linux is pretty comparable. I had some grief trying to get it working, but I did eventually get DaVinci Resolve to open and run on Manjaro. I was mostly lost because I was transitioning from HitFilm Express to Resolve at the time, but for the record, Resolve seemed to function perfectly. I didn't do extensive testing, but again, this was quite a while ago. But if I were to get Resolve running on Manjaro again, I would probably have no issues creating and rendering a video. By now though, I've cleaned my Windows bootloader and went back to Windows 10. The deal with my system is that it decides when it doesn't want to be stable. UEFI doesn't play well at all of my motherboard in Windows 10, it would most certainly blue screen. Legacy works more or less, but again, it's a weird situation. I could be using my PC perfectly fine, and maybe I want to check an Amazon order. It can sometimes work great, and other times it will cause the Windows Explorer to continuously restart. By now, I believe these random issues are potentially due to a faulty DIMM slot, or maybe due to my questionable graphics card. So at this point, you might be thinking that Linux isn't a great option to switch to. For me, it really didn't work out too well, but for others, I'd say that there's some hope. Gaming, while compatibility and performance has improved substantially with Proton, it's also arguable that due to anti-cheat that won't work on Linux, gaming might still seem like a low point. A lot of Steam games run great, but even after you figure out your library setup with drives, you may be disappointed that some games just aren't compatible. And in the case of usability and productivity, doing regular computer things was fine, and again, Resolve seemed perfectly stable while I was on Manjaro. So that's a totally legit way for me to edit videos. So, I guess to conclude, Windows 10, whether you like it or not, is flat out the best for gaming. Linux does have a wide selection of games, and Proton has enabled the ability to play a bunch of Steam's games with similar to if not better performance than Windows. But the reality is, Windows is the only way to play Windows Store games and games with anti-cheat. And even with some of the anti-cheat bypasses currently available, these games won't really be playable. But even though Linux can't replace Windows for me, I'm sure it could for some of you guys. Again, there's a bunch of games that are supported now, and even if some games don't run well or don't run at all, thanks to the awesome community, there's usually fixes that can help you get up and running. And when it comes to productivity, I'd have to get more comfortable with the file structure and navigation, but if Resolve is as stable as it appeared to be, I could definitely see myself making videos on Linux. Maybe I will sometime. To conclude, gaming on Linux has gotten a whole lot better and continues to improve thanks to the awesome developers and community. With a long list of compatible games, which you can find in the video description, gaming on Linux can be a viable option for some people, but not all. And with gaming aside, Linux is a great OS for productivity, and if there's a Windows specific app you use, you could probably find an alternative or get it running in Wine. If you've got some spare time on your hands, it only takes a USB drive and an ISO. You don't have to install anything. If you don't like it, try another distro, but if you do, installation is simple. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section, and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, but if not, you know where to go. While you're there, consider subscribing to the channel and enable notifications for more quality tech videos. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you later.